This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. A lot going on as we move right into the second week of NBA basketball season. And hey, let a lot be said. When the people say the players make this game, that is so definitely true. Coaches are definitely a part of the equation. So is the management. But these players, man, on or off the court, they make this thing go. So our focus and our attention are going to be on so much that's going on right now in an exciting season already from jump. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? How you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful, my guy. Happy to be here. The NBA season is in full tilt, as you like to say. So a lot of great conversations to be had, man. And I'm excited about this week's topic because I think it's going to be not necessarily controversial, but as they say, it will get the people going. It's going to get the people going because it's going to be some passionate conversation here today.
It's going to get the juices flowing, the juice sommelier.
Not the juice. Well, you know what's funny about it, though, is it's like I said, I think there's going to be some people faking the funk because they're going to be, like you say, so to speak, because they're going to be so biased about their prospective teams. But if we're trying to take biases out of it, look at it, somewhat objectively, and really, really kind of dig into this conversation today. So that, and obviously in the news and notes as well too. But man, yeah, definitely going to be a good one.
Yeah, listen, and when it's all said and done, y'all can blame Mr. Shaw. He's the person who crafted the madness that will be our conversation in the breakdown, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Definitely got some news and notes that we got to get into, a lot of things happening, obviously, in the association. And as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. You can get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. All you got to do is put the Baseline in the search engine. Once we pop up, just add us on and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. If you want to catch this episode and all of our previous episodes, you can go to www.thebaselinenba.com. And also know that the Baseline runs with the 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group be running these content streets. So be sure to go check out us and all of the great shows that we have available on 19 Media Group. Go to www.19mediagroup.com. All right, Mr. Shaw, let's get ourselves right into the thick of the news and notes that is happening in the association. And first topic of conversation will be the recent news that came out of San Antonio. The young phenom, Josh Primo, who was pretty much, in the thread of a lot of conversations as far as from a talent perspective go over the last couple of seasons. In regards to his ascension and what he could potentially mean in the future of the San Antonio Spurs, quote unquote, the rebirth of the Spurs dynasty, so to speak, that he was supposed to fit in the equation. San Antonio Spurs have just released the fact that they have gone ahead and waived Josh Primo as he is requested to remove himself from the team so that he can handle mental issues. And I wanted to get your perspective on this, Shaw, as it pertains to, this is something that doesn't normally get talked about. In most cases, if a team is involved in this situation, they usually put some kind of PR spin to it, probably make it more so that a player has been left on his devices. And I'm not just talking about the NBA. I'm just talking about in sports in general. And there hasn't really been a true conversation in the room about when players, they themselves acknowledge that under certain situations, that they are acknowledging the fact that, they suffer through certain mental conditions, whether it be depression, whether it be something, that is medically related to that, an illness, that they have to force themselves to walk away from the game that they probably love playing. But obviously their mental well-being is more important than the circumstances of them being on a basketball court to entertain people.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Primo is 19. The Spurs, the news comes out kind of out of seemingly nowhere. More news or reports, I guess I should say, has come out since the initial waiving. And then, Josh Primo has had some issues. I don't want to speculate, but more or less what's been said is that he's been exposing himself to women. and as a result, might have exposed himself to one of the Spurs female officials or somebody else affiliated with the team. And that stems from earlier childhood situations that he might have been involved in for whatever reason. So it's a pretty serious and pretty big deal. And the Spurs are one of the more well-renowned and prestigious organizations in the league. And not that has anything to do with it one way or the other. But I think in some ways allowing Primo to kind of go and, I hate to use the phrase, but go and find himself, appropriately and work on himself appropriately, reneging themselves or relieving themselves of the contracts or whatever the case may be with that. Like, hey, take care of what you need to take care of. And, the future is what the future is, but, no promises, assurances one way or the other, but pretty disturbing news. But I think, for Josh Primo, the fact that he's at least now willing and able to recognize that there's an issue there, it's going to take time to work on that. That's a step in the positive direction. So I'm sure there's more to come, with it and from this and all of that. And some of it won't even be any of our business, so to speak, as media. But at the end of the day, hopefully he's getting the help that he needs, to live a more fulfilling and, fruitful career in life.
So there's a couple of layers I want to unpack from this. And I know this is just news and notes, but I think it's a pretty good opportunity for us to take take this conversation to different places. So the first thing, I want to give kudos to the San Antonio Spurs because, we're not talking about like what happened with Boston with Ime Udoka, where you have a grown man, adult, who is obviously doing things in violation of the organization and the company's rules, and he himself is making that choice, right? For a moment, forget, I want to forget about whether or not we're assessing blame. What I'm saying is how the situation is being handled and how it's being looked at. I think sometimes people take for granted the fact that just because you get an NBA contract and you're 19 years old, you're suddenly catapulted into being a 30-year-old man or something. All of a sudden you have all of these levels of responsibilities that is of what you would be considered as an adult. That doesn't happen like that with some of these kids. We don't know what the situation called for in regards to him being, as focused on this as much as possible. But clearly the San Antonio Spurs had to be the adults in the room. And sometimes that's what it takes. I know a lot of people came down on, say, like the Boston Celtics for what they had to do, but this is the reason why the Boston Celtics has maintained their integrity and also their tradition and their prestige. And maybe some people like it, maybe some people don't. But if people don't step in order to make sure that certain things get handled accordingly, we as a society have this tendency to just lump people in and stereotype them and classify them and put people in situations in which we're scrutinizing them for the wrong reasons, for the wrong things. So again, I give kudos to the Spurs because I think they recognize this is a 19-year-old kid. This kid does not know anything yet. And if there's any opportunity to save him, and what I mean by that is allowing him to find a way for him to be in a better place for himself and his life moving forward, whether it is or without basketball, somebody has to be the adult in the room, step in and put him on that path. Maybe some people is influencing him saying, no, you just shouldn't be with the Spurs. Well, you name some other organizations that are probably going to be willing to take a chance on him doing what he's doing, allegedly, right? Or not coming to terms or coming to grips with the fact that his mental state of mind, his ability to be balanced in the way that he can function in society can be compromised, and there's no amount of money that can cover that up or make him feel better about what's going to happen to him moving forward.
Yeah, well, as you alluded to, I mean, it's the Spurs, I think, are doing what's in their best interest and his ultimate best interest as well. But the unfortunate part of this is that it's still very much a business.
Right.
And as we record, by the time this comes out, a team might have claimed him. There's no that because I mean he's a first round talent, that was drafted that they've let go. So a team could actually put claims on him, so to speak, and have him work through his process and then eventually have them return to that roster. So that's the risk I guess the Spurs were willing to take as opposed to just sending him away from the team to figure this stuff out. So there's a lot a lot of layers to it, and again, we'll see what ends up happening by the time this comes out. And if somebody does take a chance, if you will, to help him along that process and then put them under their own, team guideline and organization. But it's a really, really touchy situation that's, unfortunate in a lot of ways. And hopefully for him, he comes out better for this. And the Spurs as well, too, as an organization, I think they have nothing to hold their heads down about. They've done what they needed to do and feel like, hey, they're giving Primo the best chance to be successful moving forward.
Absolutely. But one other thing that I probably want to highlight, because when I think about situations like this, I think about guys like, say, for example, Josh Gordon, although his circumstance was different because of substance abuse, right? And drugs. But what it comes down to is the league, right? And I think that if you are Adam Silver, you should look into this aspect of things, because I think it does highlight, there's going to come a point, right, where athletes are going to have another opportunity to be able to come straight out of high school and be a part of professional sports. And one of the problems that has existed is, when is it too soon to thrust a kid into being an adult when he hasn't even become of adult age, right? Or when is it that we just basically say, once he becomes a professional NBA athlete, that it just completely absolves the same things that we hold other people accountable to, when we know that we don't know what his situation, his life, or whatever the case may be, simply because it's always being buried underneath a layer of so many other things. And I'm just saying that, like, I just think that this is a situation where, if you are Adam Silver and you're the NBA, you take stock into these things, and you make sure that you are doing your due diligence to really understand, not investigate with the intent to come down with a level of judgment, but with an intent to say, how do we make sure that as a league, we are not just protecting the brand, but the players who represent the brand? Because listen, this could have gone really bad. We don't know that. I mean, there's still obviously, this thing is still developing as it is, and I'm sure there's more information that's going to come out. Now I'm going to inject the other side to the equation. The women who may have been, left with a level of uncomfort as to the actions of what Primo has done. And what I'm saying is that as a league, even if the San Antonio Spurs did what was in the best interest of their business, as an NBA league, their business should be about the business of making sure that they are taking stock as to how their players are acting. That's one thing I can at least give David Stern credit to, even though he went overboard with it. He kept stock of what the players were doing and how they were representing the brand. And at a time when the NFL was basically screwing the pooch on how players are being perceived in sports entertainment, the NBA was holding up that mantle, all thanks to what David Stern was doing. And people nowadays, I think, can look back on this and say, you know what? Sometimes he may be considered the most hated of those commissioners, but you can't say that the NBA suffered during those times to such a degree that it falls on the players to make good on those decisions. And the reason why I'm saying that is we're going to be talking a little bit about Adam Silver and his decision about the hard cap in a moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the league has to figure out where they can step in, because the Players Association is stronger than ever. Quote unquote player empowerment, et cetera, and all of those things. So, you don't want now Primo, or you would hope Primo doesn't have to be ostracized as a result of it. But things like that have happened. We've seen in the league, for lesser egregiouses, if you will. So a lot more, as you alluded to, will still need to be determined here when it comes to this overall situation. And I think the Spurs, again, I think you're right to kind of praise them, because especially if female employees that are a part of that organization, why would they ever want to see Josh Primo back within that organization ever again? So the Spurs are like, listen, we're going to protect you all, internally here as our staff, as our team, as our family members of this organization. You're not going to have to deal with this individual ever again. And, hopefully Primo gets the help that he needs and, can make right in some other capacity. But yeah, this is, again, very, very complicated and a lot more to be discussed.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we keep things moving along. So Shaw, I just mentioned a moment ago, Adam Silver is considering to introduce the league having a hard cap in the next CBA negotiations. Oh, of course, players are not going to be all that happy about that, right? Like, hey, man, that means you're interrupting our bag, so to speak, right? But let's be realistic, man. Did we not think that this was probably going to come to pass? Did we not think that this was going to come to fruition? I listen, if I'm the commissioner, I got to do what I'm going to wind up doing. And if the only other sports league I think that's going to probably not have that happen will be MLB. You can clearly see how that league tends to function as a roller coaster. The NBA is the next best thing to what has obviously been a successful formula with how the NFL operates. To me, it's a no-brainer that at some point you knew Adam Silver was going to, in his nice way, you know what I'm saying? The wry smile with the glasses, you know what I'm saying? the intelligent nerd in the room. Guys, we're probably going to have to go down this road of hard capping.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen. I mean, it's already been said, the Players Association like that is a non-starter. So, but Silver is somebody who is obviously astute and good for the most part at his job. So you're starting to negotiate within the media. So you're putting it out here kind of at this higher level to say, here's what we want, understanding that that's probably not what it's going to be. And you have to meet somewhere in the middle. Now, do you get a little bit more, 60-40, 50-50? Who knows where it ultimately lands? But I think putting it out there to try to help some of the smaller market teams who can't compete with the Golden States of the world, who are spending like $1 bajillion and paying the luxury tax because who cares? Because they got money in reserve, and Bomber with the Clippers. Like, hey, who cares? It doesn't matter. So how do you make that to be a little bit more make the playing field a little bit more even? And so I think this is just a media negotiating tactic that he will ultimately have to acquiesce some on, but he wanted to start it off at kind of the highest level, understanding what the Players Association needs to be preparing themselves for when the negotiations actually start to take place.
I find it interesting, Shaw, because the NBA is a very unique, is in a unique space when it comes to this, right? Like with the NFL, the hard cap, I think, for 53 guys, on a roster, you think kind of makes sense, or else you probably would just only have maybe 22 legit players and no depth. The Warriors, they spend their money on the quality of what their players have given them. I mean, it's like every single one of their players, I don't want to say has reset the market with the exception of Steph Curry. They've just paid on the higher end guys like Klay Thompson, guys like Draymond Green, based on what other teams have invested their money on and who they thought were the best players at their quote unquote positions, so to speak. And I don't know what that's yielded for those teams, right? Like the money that's been thrown out at John Wall, the money that's been thrown out at Bradley Beal, at CJ McCollum, you know what I'm saying? Those Anthony Davis, you know what I'm saying? When he decided to return for the Pelicans after his rookie deal, or got extended. Like, to me, I understand that this to me is more so about the revenue and what's taking place with the league. And yes, maybe a little bit to the smaller teams, but I don't know if there are too many teams who have really gotten it right anyway. Even if what we're saying is we're going to continue to keep doing what we're doing. The fact that most of these teams are recklessly spending their money on guys who I don't know whether or not they've lived up to what is justified. I think that Silver may have a different angle in the way that he's playing this, not about a level of competitiveness, but about saying, hey, you guys, man, I know you got money to throw around, but do you realize that by you throwing money recklessly at a player who obviously is not warranted the money deemed, you're resetting the market to make it even more impossible for us to have a more level, balanced, competitive playing field with the way guys compete to get that money.
I mean, it's hard. It's a difficult conversation.
Right.
And players are going to be evaluated, at various lenses. And, this is just like you or I, maybe even our full-time jobs. Hey, I'm sure we all feel like we're overworked and undervalued, but our organizations are going to say, like, well, here's what the salary is. And, I think teams can ultimately decide what that ultimately looks like. But there's no accounting for when, an agent is in a player's ear or the family members in that player's ear or whatever. And it's like, listen, well, I'm this team over here and I'm going to give this guy $30 million, but his market value, so to speak, is probably more in the, $20 million range or $18 million range. And then you have all the other nuances that triggers the caps and which you can be able to get more money as a result of years served within the league. It's a complex model that's really maybe all that complex if people were trying to really truly evaluate, but there's no real evaluation system. I think it's all going to consistently be subjective, based on the general manager's evaluation and the players' evaluation, even of themselves. And that's where you get into some of these kind of larger numbers. You're like, oh, who such and such got what? And some of it is like, who has money this year? So then now as a result, well, because I had money this year, now I set the cap, or I set a market value for a player who averages 12-5, but next year there's not as much money. So now next year's 12-5 players like, well, such and such got $28 million last year. Well, there's not $28 million available this year. So those are things that I think you can't necessarily account for in its totality. A hard cap, I think, would be an interesting try at a solution. I don't think it will work, and I don't think the players are going to go for it, or in fact, I'm positive they will not go for it. But I think understanding that, how can you try to start to create more competitive balance? Does Klay Thompson, a guy who's going to make $40 million to KCB, is like, all right, well, now Golden State can't pay me, so F it, I'm done here playing with Steph Curry. I'm going to go somewhere else who has $40 million available. If these hard cap restrictions are kind of in place, like that's just kind of like a loose example, things that could come to place. Or the Celtics with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. All right, do you want to have two $40+ million guys on your team, and now you can't really do anything else except having those two guys? So I don't know, a lot to be discussed here in the CBA, and I wouldn't want to be either side, and the lawyers having to go through the negotiations, because it's going to be pretty dicey.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty dicey. And I think you and I are obviously attacking it from two very different perspectives, because I'm almost of the mindset that I think by doing a hard cap, you actually level the money that is very top heavy to the most talented players in the league right now. And you're also putting accountability on players who, yes, they come out as free agents just in the right time, that they become or get catapulted as to being one of the top prospects in free agency, meaning that teams are going to pay an exorbitant amount of money, even though their talent, I don't use the word talent, their numbers, because it's so analytically based. And I think that's another thing as well, too. I think that sometimes the analytics, and we had a guest on who helped, kind of bring the point to bear on how their ability to look into the numbers specifically can help elevate a player's ability to get more money in their contractual negotiations. And it's not to say that, they're fudging anything. What I'm saying is that they are introducing a different perspective of how this player can be valued. And that value is worth more than what maybe that GM or that owner was probably saying is going to be my baseline and what I'm looking for a player to fill that role or that position. So look, here's the thing. At the end of the day, when this is all said and done, Shaw, this is kind of like the script that's being written out to an eventual Avengers Endgame type thing. At some point, something's going to give. I just don't think that it's something that's going to immediately happen. But the fact that it is now in the ethos, and the fact that Adam Silver has now put it out there, means we're no longer whispering this inside, the conference room. This is now going to be aired out in the public ethos for the public to actually think about this as well, too. Because I do think that even the fans may have some say about how, whether or not it's relative for us to think that the NBA may actually have to go in that direction if we want to continue to see competitive play, but also see that there is a much more balanced evaluation of the players top to bottom, and then being properly compensated by the organizations when they become free agents as well, too. You're tuned to
there's a lot of math involved in it, a lot of math. And, my closing point in this is that you would have to deconstruct some of the structure in terms of the years served now by saying, okay, I'm ex-veteran. Now, as a result of me having this amount of years of service, I can get up to $50 million, $55 million, or whatever percentage of the increasing salary cap is ultimately going to be. Something has to give within that construct itself to that year served thing, or in essence, kind of like what the percentage of what the cap can be to what one player can ultimately get. And that's where, again, the math starts to math. It becomes really difficult for both sides to kind of find an even playing ground where they'd both be happy. So, yeah,
absolutely. And, one other thing as well, too, Shaw, I think the concept of the restricted free agent, I think now comes into play as well too, right? I mean, if we look at what happened to DeAndre Ayton, let's not act like, oh, DeAndre Ayton was ecstatic that the Phoenix Suns matched the offer that I think it was the Indiana Pacers that offered him a pretty large contract. And I'm sure that his intent was, I'm just ready to get out of here. But as a restricted free agent, the Phoenix Suns were able to match that offer. He stays, right? Now, you got to be a professional, but that doesn't mean that when we are talking about what may happen, when we talk about hard cap and things of that nature, it could possibly do away or lessen the stringencies that come with being, quote unquote, a restricted free agent. To your point, there could be numbers involved that changes that scope and dynamic, because in most cases, a team knowing that they're going to be up against the cap, they'll probably go ahead, if you're the Phoenix Suns, and say, we can afford to let a DeAndre Ayton go, right? Because then we can get a guy like Josh Landale to come in and do what we need him to do for us, that we essentially may not be needing a guy like DeAndre Ayton, who's going to be worth a whole lot more money on the market to do for us, you know? So it could play that dynamic very differently. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal, Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we go through our news and notes. All right, let's get into some quick injury reports that are taking place this week, Shaw. Damian Lillard, it ain't Dame time right now, man. He's going to miss 1 to 2 weeks with a calf strain. But don't fret, Portland fans. You got Anthony Simons, and homie looked like he trying to be that dude. You know what I'm saying? Whether or not Damian is or isn't on the court. So.
Yeah, it's interesting for me with Simons. He's trying to figure out the role. Obviously, he got rid of CJ last year, so he plays better when Dame's not there. I don't think he's been a CJ equivalent when Dame has been there, at least not yet in the early part of the season. He's just been better more or less when Dame has been off the floor. But hopefully we'll figure that stuff out. Portland off to a better start than I would have expected. So, congratulations to them. So hopefully Dame comes back relatively quickly. They can continue that great success that they've had to begin the year.
Do you think that there's an opportunity for Anthony to be most improved player?
No, not at all. Not a chance. I mean, not a chance. I just think there's going to be guys with stronger cases ultimately.
Stronger cases.
And we kind of saw what Simons did at the end of last year. Saw how much of that will carry over, because now we kind of expect him to be at a certain level.
Yeah, I got you. Now I'm just checking, just double checking. You know what I'm saying? Right. All right, cool. You ain't got a fan over here, my friend. All right. And speaking of DeAndre Ayton, who was our test case in the CBA conversation a moment ago, he's going to be out at least a week. So that gave us a little bit of an opportunity for us to watch, Aussie's own, new wonder, coming out of there. Was his name Jock Landale? I'm sorry, I said Josh. It's Jock. You know what I'm saying? So what up with our boy Young Jock? He's gonna steal Ayton's spot?
No. But he's definitely find a way to be.
I love his energy, though, bro.
No,
I love his energy. Yeah, man.
Yeah, he's also becoming one of those NBA Twitter fan favorites. You know what I mean? The kind of the underdog, scrappy guy who kind of gets it done and just tries to do whatever he needs to do. So Jacques, we'll see where it lands for him long term. But with Ayton out,
if Phoenix is smart, they need to get that slogan out and lean with it, jock with it.
Stop. Okay. Put it in your back pocket, or go apply to work with the Phoenix Suns. I think either way, though, Bismack Biyombo gets another great opportunity. He was such a shrewd pickup for them last year, so he'll plug most of Ayton's minutes. But as you alluded to, Jock Landale will get some opportunities there as well too. So
yeah, I mean, look, but he did look pretty impressive though. The other night when I was watching him play, I forget who it was. It was the Suns versus the. Was it the Mavs?
Don't know. I mean,
I can't remember.
In the year. That was the first game of the year.
No, it wasn't the first. No, it wasn't. It was the first. It was just the other night. But no, the Suns look. Listen, regular season look impressive as always, and Monty Williams getting the most out of his players, even when guys go down. So true to form, everything is as scheduled. The Suns will probably be up there, top 3, top 4 team in the West. It's just going to be a question of, can it get the job done when they get into the playoffs?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, coming up, Sean and I are going to discuss best starting five. Yeah, there's some conditions to that thought. So you'll find out where we're going with this here and more on the baseline. Time to break it down to the bone gristle. And we are back. Cal Lee Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for the breakdown. What is the best starting five? So normally when you hear this question, because I did this before we were even recording this show. So damn you, Shaw. But normally when we hear this question, you kind of think to yourself, like, who is the best starting five players in the NBA? Right? But we're not talking about that. No. Shaw's mind works way too crude for that. He has to go in a completely different direction. What he's looking at is, who do you consider as your best starting five players on a team? The teams that we currently have constructed in the NBA. So basically, you're essentially saying, if we were ranking all of the players in the NBA, obviously the best teams would be the ones that have the highest ranked players in each of their respective positions within that top 100. And so never really attacked it from that perspective, Shaw. Because ultimately, when you look at who typically wins the NBA championship, it's never who has the best starting five players, all together, as much as it is who are the best five players going into the NBA finals that are competing. Meaning these guys could probably start off looking like ass. And then they they find their groove, and suddenly they look like arguably one of the most difficult teams to play up against when it really matters, when the chip is on the line. So that's a really interesting question that you've introduced to us, Shaw. And on behalf of our listeners, I'd like to say, damn you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay. And that's what it's all about. The
Exactly.
baseline is meant to make our listeners and our fans think a little bit, and we're scratching our own heads here, trying to understand, all right, well, what factors should we consider and what ultimately matters? Because some people are always just going to lean on the fact like, okay, well, the quote unquote best team must obviously have the best starting five, not necessarily taking into account coaching, what their bench looks like, what their management looks like up top, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you're just not just trying to look at it on paper, because there's some teams who like, all right, well, they have a bunch of guys whose names so therefore you might consider them to be the best starting five. But how do you combine all of those things, what their point differential might be from when they're on the floor, from when their bench actually comes in, and all of that, and not just names So I think it becomes a very nuanced conversation that opens up the conversation for a lot of different teams based on those determining factors. So, when we put the poll out there, on TikTok, some things on Twitter as well too, and IG. So just basically social media. And ironically, the overwhelming response, and let me take that back, not so ironically, is that, most fans are going to be prisoners of the moment. Who won the NBA championship last year? And that was the Golden State Warriors. So almost everybody, I'd say maybe 70 to 80% of the people who responded said Golden State. And they have to be considered as one of the better starting fives in the NBA because they do have not only star power in it, not only they have shooting in it, they have defense in it, and they have guys who basically know how to play the roles that they're assigned to, and that goes a long way. So that's where this conversation is kind of going. Golden State led our social media poll, and I don't think we disagree with them at least being within this conversation, even in the top 2 or 3, but definitely interested to see where we can take this conversation outside of Golden State.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I guess maybe you and I have been doing our show for as long as we've been doing it, right? And we have always put out very challenging questions or put some more, thought into not just, what the eye test tells us, but even what the numbers may even tell us and everything like that. And it's interesting because maybe this is just how I work. I don't think it's a fluke sometimes when I go conspiracy theory on things or whatever the case may be. I just have a different way of how my mindset works about how I look at these teams. So when you pose this question and I, after 2 or 3 attempts at getting it right and understanding what the hell you were talking about, I automatically came to my conclusion that if I had to say which team right now has the best starting five from top to bottom, the hard pressed to tell me that it wouldn't be the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Like, I know that people are prisoners in the moment and are saying, well, why would you think something like that? Well, okay, well, let's break this down real quick, right? Like, first of all, your point guard is Jrue Holiday. Jrue Holiday has always been proven to be a 20-point per game score. You know what I'm saying? At some point, he's not asked of that, but is more than capable of showing that he can do that. He's still one of the best defenders on the ball, off the ball, at the point guard position, right? Matter of fact, that was the reason why they brought him to Milwaukee, was because they needed backcourt defensive help. Oh, by the way, the guy can still drop 20-25 when necessary, right? Then you look at the guard position, which I'm sure there always can, you have to have the best or the worst. No, but Grayson Allen is nothing to sniff at. The kid averages what, like close to 40% from three, right? Chris Middleton, when healthy, arguably one of the second best complementary players to one of the most dominant players in the game of basketball, right? Can easily get you 20 plus something points per game, and has proven that he is shaken off the cobwebs of not coming up big in the moments, right? And is also a pretty versatile forward. Then you have Giannis Antetokounmpo. All right. Then you've got Brook Lopez, right? Where you can basically say, when Brook Lopez first came into the NBA, he was amongst one of the top scorers in the NBA. Then he completely changed his game, and he has now become, rather than a defensive liability, he is an actual defensive presence, has probably some of the best metrics as a center defensively. And then he also shoots the three ball somewhere at a mid 38% clip. I'm telling you, man, up and down, if you were to say, I have to stop Giannis, you cannot say that you can stop all of these other components that the Milwaukee Bucks have. Now, does it come together all the time? Probably not. But with Budenholzer and with this type of lineup, man, I'm finding it very hard for anyone to sell me on the idea that you can find a better five that you, every year in, year out, if this is how they are playing at this level, that they are not in the conversation to easily be going to an NBA finals to compete.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I want to even nuance the conversation even more than that, per se. I mean, yes, winning ultimately matters here, but for the sake of the conversation, is okay, like who probably instills the most amount of fear of you in the beginning of the game? Like, we're starting finals, like, all right, we know we're going to have our hands full, championships or otherwise. And I think Milwaukee is right up there. They're definitely on the top of my list as well, too, because of all the reasons you just mentioned. Versatility, offensively and defensively. Lopez is a menace. He's an absolute menace on the inside. He's one of the league leaders in, shot contest on a regular basis. You don't necessarily need to be involving him in pick and roll because he's going to defend your guard. He's gonna make it difficult for you. And he blocks shots at the rim as well, too, in addition to being, a three-point shooter on the other side of the basketball. So to me, yes, the shooting guard position might be the one that's in question. And Pat Connaughton may eventually start here when he comes back from injury. But I think, to me, in some ways, Connaughton and Grayson Allen are somewhat interchangeable and give the team kind of similar things. They're both kind of scrappy on defense, both shoot the ball from three-point land, and can be an outlet to Jrue Holiday or Giannis, on kickouts and things like that nature. So to me, Milwaukee has as much skin in the game in this conversation as anybody else. And I think if you comparing them to Golden State, you probably look at Golden State and say Kevin Looney is probably their weakest link. And the thing in Milwaukee is, okay, the shooting guard, whoever that is, Grayson Allen or Pat Connaughton, would be their weakest link. And that's not saying anything negative at all. It just means, hey, it's just not the cream of the crop. But yeah,
that's a nice trade-off that I will not, poop, like, go, oh my God. Like, like that's a wash. So.
Yeah, agreed. So I think Golden State and Milwaukee probably lead the conversation, but there are some other teams out there that make some sense. And, I'll just kind of jump right in, especially when you're talking about, at least on paper, versatility and some size. I think I'm not ranking them third per se, but Denver has to be in the conversation when healthy. So if Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. specifically are there, with the addition of KCP, Aaron Gordon, and obviously your two-time MVP, Nikola Jokic, that's a pretty formidable starting five if they can get everybody to click on all cylinders and, like, as we alluded to, just remain healthy Gordon playing just a defensive role as a back cutter on offense, and just kind of get his where he needs to. KCP being a reliable outlet and also defending on the other side of the basketball. In addition to what we already know Murray and Michael Porter when healthy can do. To me, Denver is one of the probably more underrated teams, probably that should be in this conversation that I don't necessarily know a lot of people are thinking about, especially in this part of the year because they haven't looked amazing because Murray is not clearly healthy. But when all is said and done, I'd be surprised if they're not one of the league leaders in point differential with their starting five once these guys are up and running.
I think the only thing that would be in question is how this team holds up defensively, even if you have all of these guys healthy, right? Like, I just look at the fact that the offensive potential of this team is more so potent. I don't want to, I hate to say this because I don't want to make it sound callous, but I feel like this team offensively can even be more potent than the Golden State Warriors. Like Jamal Murray, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who, if Klay Thompson doesn't eventually come around from, being 100% from the injury that he suffered, you can make the argument that you get more out of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope because he still can give it to you from both sides of the ball, right? Michael Porter Jr., man, this kid's an enigma. And I think that, like, in some respects, he is the outlier to what you would hope Andrew Wiggins is to the Golden State Warriors, right? I definitely see more offensive potential in Aaron Gordon than I will ever see from Draymond Green. But even though Draymond is still a defensive stalwart, I still think that there's upside because Aaron Gordon's athleticism allows him to be as equally versatile. You just got to know how to harness all of that power. It's just kind of, it's like Cyclops without his glasses. It just kind of goes all over the place if it's not harnessed properly. And then there's Jokic, right? I mean, not even Draymond Green and not even Kevon Looney. I mean, they can double Jokic and they will not be able to stop Jokic. So to your point, Shaw, very scary lineup when you look at the Denver Nuggets and just their offensive potential. I do think, though, defensively is where I question more so of what this team can properly represent because they're not as athletic as I think other teams can typically be, but they do have size. They do have girth. Like, you know what I'm saying? They can bully you, right? They've got bigger bodies to play with. So, yeah, so the Nuggets is definitely a solid pick.
Yeah, man. And again, hopefully with them, you just want to see them stay healthy. And it's funny though, I think in all the conversation, we keep kind of tying back to Golden State because they did win the NBA championship, and try to compare their lineups maybe to some others. But I think the Nuggets, if they can stay healthy, will really have a lot to say about this. And I think defense is something that they do need to figure out more poignantly and more regularly because they do have, like, the requisite size, I think the capability. And I think when you're coming back from injury like Murray and Porter are, you're probably more focused on trying to get your offense in order. So it'll be interesting to see what Coach Michael Malone does with them on that side of the basketball to see if they can get him to buy in on that as well, too, as they do have NBA championship aspirations.
All right, Shaw. So now I know where, our peoples are going. Be like, oh, you giving love to the Bucks? Oh, you giving love to the Warriors? You giving love to the Nuggets, but no love to the Celtics? So where would we have the Boston Celtics, on this list that we have, you know what I'm saying, determined and deemed as saying these are among the best starting fives, representing in the NBA?
I think the Celtics is contingent upon if and when Robert Williams comes back and is healthy.
Exactly.
And then they become, they can catapult, I think, in the top even 2 or 3 of this conversation. As currently constructed with Derek White as a starter, nothing against Derek White, but it's pushing Al Horford in the 5-man spot, Tatum into the 4, and it's just not seeing the quite same level of defense that I think we would expect, or that we saw from this team last year. Robert Williams means so much to them in that regard. So it allows Horford to play a more natural 4 position, Tatum to go back to the 3, Brown to start at the 2, and Marcus Smart at the 1. And it makes obviously the Celtics bench that much stronger too by putting White back there as well. So to me, it's all contingent upon when Robert Williams is able to come back to this lineup and if he can be, himself. As a guy who can hedge on the pick and roll, play drop coverage against anybody but the Warriors, and then obviously be a deterrent, within the lane, blocking shots and containing them in a way that he didn't do early on in his career. So that's where Boston lands. They need Robert Williams to be fully embedded in this conversation. But Derek White as a starter and Halford playing the 5, not really a whole lot of viability in the upper echelons of this conversation, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I think we have to give credit to is the evolution of Robert Williams, so quickly, right? Like, we had been talking about how the Celtics need to play bigger to compete with some of the other teams, because I just think on the level of how they were constructed, there was always going to be this question mark of their ability to rebound, their ability that if they weren't shooting the basketball, which, look, the Celtics are a good shooting basketball team, but they're not prolific, right? They have their ebb and flows. So baskets needs to come easier if they're playing more aggressively. And so when I look at this roster, I felt like they still lacked something from an aggressive nature. And I think it was lacking in what was coming out of the front court. And so to your point, Shaw, when a guy like Robert Williams, who finally has that switch and he turns it on and he knows what he's capable of, not just what he can give you offensively, but certainly what he's established himself as being defensively, I think it goes a long, long way when you look at this 5 and what they're capable of giving you, right? Marcus Smart's ability to shoot the 3, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I would love to still see more aggressiveness from them, but again, these guys haven't even hit, just eclipsed the halfway mark of their 20s, right? So it's just like there's so much room of improvement there. And so when you look at that starting 5 is can definitely be formidable. All right, so if I say to you, all right, the Boston Celtics are, one player from injury away from being what we consider that as being an echelon top 5 starting team, what do we say about the Los Angeles Clippers, who essentially now have their players back?
Yeah, well, the issue with the Clippers here now is because Kawhi is already, I guess he's not on the injured list, but he's not playing right now. I think at the end of the season, if he's back up and running, I'd like to see a different lineup than what I guess I've seen from him thus far. And I don't know who exactly is going to go to the bench once Kawhi re-enters the starting lineup. But I like to see probably Kawhi at the 3, PG at the 4, playing that kind of like interchangeable 3-4 role, kind of like how Tatum is playing the 4 now in Boston. You have Zubac, if you will. And I'd actually like to see Norman Powell enter the starting lineup alongside either Wall or Reggie Jackson. And I think that gives them a lot of potency. The issue, though, with that is, do you trust Reggie Jackson to come off your bench and be consistent, or do you feel like Wall can continue to do that? And do you want Norman Powell to be like the offensive, kind of megastar that he is, as a slasher and a 3-point shooter? And would you rather have that in a reserve role? So to me, that's where the Clippers lineup, I think Ty Lue's got to figure out what makes his team most efficient. So maybe it isn't having the best quote unquote starting 5 out there for their long-term viability for what they obviously are hoping for as an NBA championship. So to me, that's why there's so many qualifiers for the Clippers, why I feel like we need to have a conversation about them, but they're not firmly planted in it because they have a lot of questions. And I think they could have a better starting 5 than what I've seen. But I mean, Ty Lue's obviously smarter than me, so he knows what he needs to do. And he's not trying to fit our conversation. He's trying to win an NBA championship.
Do you think the combination of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard scare you the same way now than it did when they first came aboard to be with the Los Angeles Clippers?
And again, as you asked the question here, and end of October, early November, no, because I think there's some questions about what semblance of Kawhi we're going to get back, right. And it's so early. So I always feel like in some ways you're probably also going to feel like, well, he even psyched himself out to some degree. Will he ever feel fully confident and comfortable to be the MVP, NBA Finals MVP level type guy that we saw in years past? So I don't think the Clippers strike as much fear, although we picked them as heavy favorites to be one of the teams compete in the Western Conference and potentially usurp the Golden State Warriors. I'm backing off of that a little bit now because I didn't realize he still wasn't as right, or at least physically or mentally as right as I would have expected him to be at this stage, coming off, being out for over a year.
I agree with you. I just think for me, the difference is, and I say this because I kind of feel bad for the rest of the supporting cast, that how this team has been constructed. And I guess you could also give a whole lot of credit to Tyronn Lue for what he's been able to extract out of everyone else when both of his top players were unable to, be on the floor at the same time and help this team compete over the last couple of seasons. All of these guys have been empowered in some sort of way to come in and really help build the Clippers to what they are. But if you look at them, there's still this codependency on guys like Paul George and guys like Kawhi Leonard, which is why we kind of call them role players. Like it's not like how we were just talking about, the Celtics, right? Where these guys have built themselves up and have established themselves solely on being someone who can go out there and make an identity for themselves for what they bring to the table, like what their game translates to. Guys like, John Wall, I feel like are still going to be dependent upon what guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard do. Guys like Reggie Jackson, guys like Ivica Zubac, right? Batum, if they, whenever they're interchanging or whatever the case may be, it just feels like the players around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard still lack an identity that is independent of and still feels codependent of what Paul George and Kawhi Leonard is supposed to mean to this team. And if you're telling me that you're going to have a legit starting five amongst the better other starting fives that are out there, that part is what I think you would knock the Los Angeles Clippers for. It doesn't mean that these guys are not among the top teams. But what I'm saying is if you take out Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, can you lean on any of these other three guys in their positions more than the ones that we've just previously talked about and rely on them more that they can help elevate this team when those two players are either not in the lineup or are not playing or performing at a very high level?
Yeah, but I think when you're subtracting it from the starting five per se, the conversation, it just changes fundamentally. And I say that for every other team as well. But you would hope, I think, if I'm getting you right to some degree, is that you would hope that these other guys, while PG and Kawhi are kind of in and out of lineup, that they get to a certain level of confidence, to be able to succeed and really be able to produce,
right,
to be a better teammate for when those guys are ultimately there as well too. So, hoping like the iron sharpens iron, or just again, that trial by fire experience type of situation. So I think in some ways we've seen it to Ty Lue's, to his overall kind of coaching acumen and what he's been able to do with the roster. But that was last year, knowing that Kawhi wasn't going to be there.
Well, and so this is where, and I'm glad that you said that, because no, you're not wrong in what I'm trying to interpret a little bit. And you may not completely agree with me, but this is the reason why I kind of lump guys like teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, the Philadelphia 76ers. I want to say maybe the Miami Heat, maybe even and the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, they have star power, right? You've got legit guys that have star power, but it feels like everyone else doesn't play at a level where you can identify them solely as for who they are and what they bring to the table, not unless those guys are there. And when those guys aren't on, that's the whole point of having a five, right? Like if one of your starters is not playing at a high level, other guys on that team can step in. The coach can change the system, can change the play call, and move the ball to somebody else who's going to go out there and get buckets. And I feel like this is part of the reason why we can't inject so quickly guys, teams like the Sixers, like the Heat at times, because it just feels like you're still not getting that from those guys when you compare them to what the other teams have shown you that they're capable of doing, right? Like you could have easily brought down the Denver Nuggets a couple notches, but we've seen what happens when Michael Porter Jr. is actually in a lineup. We've seen what happens when Aaron Gordon is the only guy on the court and Nikola Jokic, he's in foul trouble. And he can turn around and get you like 20-something points per game. What Jamal Murray has shown us when he goes into the playoffs. Part of that dichotomy that I find that we are entrenched in at times is when you're talking about a starting five, it's not just even the fact that you have a star player. It's what the star players are influencing those other guys to step up and do to the best of what they're capable of doing. And some of these other teams, that's where they get lost. If their best player isn't on the floor, suddenly they just, oh no, I don't know where to go. I don't know where I can be helpful to this team. And you can't think like that. Like when Klay Thompson came back, everybody still knew that Jordan Poole was their best opportunity to having what the Splash Brothers represent. That's what I'm saying. Jordan Poole didn't stop being Jordan Poole, right? Even though he's not a legit starting 5 right now for that roster, he could be a legit starter for other teams, you know what I'm saying, for the Warriors. But the fact that we know that Klay Thompson, when healthy, shoots the ball way better than Jordan Poole. It's a question of when. So you rely on that because you know that that's what that starting 5 represents. When you look at the rosters for some of these other guys, man, it's like they've been on this starting 5 for quite some time. But unless they have the best player next to them, they're only a shell of what I think that they think they're capable of, if that makes sense.
It's all role definement, you know what I mean? And I think you have, as we like to say, some of the irrational confidence guys, you know, some people who probably feel like they should do more, even if the starters are out there. I mean, the main guys are out there. But I think it's about, you know, what your team structure is like, and how well do you feed off of each other. So understanding like, hey, these minutes are going to be staggered. So no, I know I'm going to get more touches or have a different opportunity here from when X player is on the floor with me. And now my role is going to be this. I'm going to be more of a screener, or whatever the case would be, more of a rebounder, you know, trying to figuring out from that lens. But all of them, again, it's all team chemistry. It's all team dynamics. And I think it's going to be different no matter what team you're on. So yeah, plugging and playing is maybe not as easy as we'd like it to be sometimes.
All right. My final question for you, Shaw, is how soon before we elevate teams like the Cleveland Cavs, the Memphis Grizz, and the Minnesota Timberwolves, how long before we have them injected, let's say in your, you know what I'm saying, legit starting, you know, top starting 5 lineups, you know, moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably get some good understanding of, especially of the Cavs, and I'd say maybe even Minnesota, probably by the midpoint of this year, understanding like kind of like where that's at. We need Garland to be back for Cleveland, and just see some more time, you know, what that looks like. Karis LeVert starting in Cleveland right now. I don't know if that will continue, you know, once Garland is back, because I think they will be looking for more ball handling in the starting lineup.
And I forgot to mention the Pelicans as well. I forgot to mention them.
Yeah, and you know, too, and CJ's playing the point guard, and you know, Herb Jones is starting at the 2, and you know what? Again, I don't know if they have enough shooting in their starting 5 for me in New Orleans, but I think they're obviously a very formidable basketball roster. So Cleveland, New Orleans, and Minnesota as well too. I just want to see what the chemistry is, but I think they're the ones that probably stand out the most in terms of the names of people you know, and just like, okay, they look flashy from that lens, but does it translate onto the basketball court? So just not enough time for me to understand them just yet, but they're definitely knocking on the door, if just by virtue of name power alone.
All right, and I'm sure the Dallas Mavericks fans feel like legit disrespected.
Perhaps. I don't. So
I feel how far off? I think that they're a little bit closer than I think most people probably give them credit for. I don't think that it's out of nowhere. I mean, but clearly their team still feels like it's missing something for us to fully inject them into that conversation of, you know, how you do your tiers, like, you know, we've been doing this tiers. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like the Dallas Mavericks somewhere are like a tier 3, you know what I'm saying, type team that could possibly be on the cusp of a tier 2 if they legit believe that what their roster represents, and they compete, right? Like they are nothing to slouch at, you know, but straight up and down, you look at that roster and you're saying to yourself, yeah, if there is no Luka Doncic and these guys had to stand on their own, do they compete and match up with what the rest of these other teams that we've been mentioning? And I feel like, I think that acquires a little bit more time as well, too, for them to kind of earn, you know what I'm saying, that moniker, that name, you know what I'm saying, to be in that conversation.
No, well, you're higher on them than I am. I think Luka clearly elevates their overall starting 5 to a level that if he was missing, that they'd fall off the face of the earth. So, and
I put them in a black hole already.
But I think collectively they're coached well. You know, they played relatively good defense and they work well together as a unit. But Luka is so much of that connective tissue that I don't have a lot of confidence in them outside of that. I think Miami and Toronto probably have better, you know, standing as starting 5s, as they're not so star dominant. I think from either lens, you know, they have multiple guys who do different things for them and can pick up the pace, where Dallas is just so Luka reliant that it's just hard for me to put them as a collective unit into this conversation.
Whew. All right, man. Hey, Dallas fans, I gave them the opportunity. That smoke came from the other side. You know what I'm saying?
I didn't say they're a bad team. Just said they're not in the starting five conversation.
They're just not in the starting five conversation. Awesome stuff. Well, we want to hear from you guys. Who do you have as your legit starting five? Best starting five for teams that are representing right now in the NBA. Be sure to get us at NBA Baseline. Awesome show this week, Shaw. Great topic of conversation as always, man. And, like I said, so many different moving parts going on and off the court, man. So we definitely are going to have to keep our eyes peeled as we continue to journey through the season.
You know what it is. So as we said, man, make sure you let us know who you think the best starting fives are out there. Maybe we'll do benches next or something like that to kind of keep this conversation going. But exciting show. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and we'll participate in this conversation moving forward throughout the course of the regular season.
Absolutely, man. And if you want any more of that smoke, you know where to go find my man Shaw at Shaw Sports
NBA. I'm ready.
Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do.